Mrs. Lon was an elderly woman living in a small, modest house in a peaceful countryside village. Her life had seen its share of ups and downs, but the greatest heartbreak was losing her beloved husband, Mr. High, in a sudden accident over 20 years ago. Since his passing, she had carried the weight of her loss quietly, raising her children and keeping the memories of her husband alive. To her, the pain of missing him remained as fresh as the day he left. Her house, though simple, was filled with memories of Mr. High, the chair where he used to sit and read, the wooden table where they shared countless cups of tea, and the old photograph of him resting on the altar. All reminded her of the happy days they had shared. Every day Mrs. Lant followed a routine. After her simple breakfast, she would sit by the window, gazing out at the fields in the distance. Those fields held special meaning to her. They were where she and Mr. High often strolled hand in hand during their younger days. In her hands, she always held an old photograph of Mr. High. The picture had yellowed with time, its edges worn, but it was her most treasured possession. She would sometimes run her fingers over the photo, as if she could still feel his presence. His eyes in the photograph, warm and kind, seemed to gaze back at her, just as they had in life. Her neighbors often said Mrs. Land lived in solitude, but she didn't feel lonely. To her, the memories of Mr. High were the greatest comfort. She would talk to him as if he were still there, sharing stories about their children and grandchildren. In those quiet moments, she felt as though he were listening, protecting her from afar. Even though she knew Mr. High was no longer with her, Mrs. Land believed that the love they shared had never faded. It lived on in every corner of their home, in every keepsake, and most importantly, in her heart. What she didn't expect, however, was what came next, a mysterious calling from the other side, as if her beloved husband had never truly left. On quiet late nights, when everyone in the house was fast asleep, Mrs. Lan often lay alone on her old wooden bed. The faint light of an oil lamp cast her shadow on the wall. The silence was so profound that she could hear every whisper of the wind outside the window and the chirping of insects from the garden behind the house. But amidst this stillness, something strange happened. It was a voice, gentle yet clear, familiar as though it came from the depths of her memories. "Lan? Lan?" Mrs. Lan startled awake, her heart pounding. It wasn't a dream. It was a real voice. The voice of Mr. High, her husband, who had passed away over 20 years ago. The first time she heard it, she thought she was imagining things. Perhaps she missed him so much that her mind conjured up the sound of his voice. But no, the voice came again and again, every night at the same time. It called out, soft but unmistakably real, as if Mr. High were standing just outside her door. Stranger still, only she could hear it. She told her children, but no one believed her. They all thought it was just the imagination of an old woman living in solitude. Yet Mrs. Lan knew she wasn't mistaken. That voice was unmistakable. It had been her companion for a lifetime, from the early days when they built a family together to the day he left this world. Each time she heard the voice, she didn't feel frightened. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace, as though Mr. High was drawing near, reassuring her that she wasn't alone. She lay quietly, her eyes gazing into the dark corner of the room, where she imagined his figure might be. In her heart, she wondered, is he waiting for me? Has the time come for me to see him again? One quiet night, as the dim light of an oil lamp cast faint shadows on the wall, Mrs. Land drifted into a deep sleep. This sleep was more than just rest for her body. It seemed like a doorway to another realm, where reality and dreams intertwined seamlessly. In her dream, she found herself standing in the middle of a vast field of vibrant flowers. The blossoms swayed gently in the soft breeze, releasing a soothing fragrance that filled the air. She felt a profound sense of peace and warmth, as if the entire world had paused just for her. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. It was Mr. High. He looked exactly as she remembered. Kind eyes, a serene face, and that gentle smile that always made her feel safe. He walked toward her, his gaze never leaving hers, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Softly, he said, "Lan, don't be afraid. It's time for us to be together again." His voice carried no sadness or fear, only tenderness and love. Mrs. Lan stood silently, absorbing every word, every breath, as though he had never truly left her. She felt no fear, nor did she feel the need to ask any questions. Instead, a deep sense of peace blossomed within her. She didn't speak, only smiled at him. In that moment, she understood that her time in this world was nearing its end. She realized this dream wasn't just a fleeting illusion, but a message, a gentle preparation for her final journey. When she woke the next morning, the dream remained vivid in her mind. But instead of fear or worry, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief and readiness. Her heart was filled with tranquility, as though she had found the answer to the questions she had carried for so long. 3 days before her passing, Mrs. Lan sat on her old wooden bed, the faint glow of an oil lamp softly illuminating her kind face. Her children gathered around her in the small, cozy room. The atmosphere was warm yet filled with a quiet sense of unease. Mrs. Lan had called them together, knowing it was time to share her final thoughts. With a gentle but firm voice, she began, "My dear children, there's something important I need to tell you. In the past few days, I've been hearing a voice. It's your father's voice. He's been calling me, his voice so familiar, as if he's standing right next to me. And last night I had a dream about him." The room fell silent. Her children sat motionless, listening intently. Mrs. Lan continued, her eyes gazing into the distance as if reliving the dream. "In my dream, I was standing in a field of flowers. In the distance, your father appeared walking toward me. He looked at me with that same gentle smile I've always known. He said, 'Lan, don't be afraid. It's time for us to be together again.'" Her eldest son, his voice trembling with emotion, asked, "Mother, are you afraid?" Mrs. Lan smiled softly, her gaze warm and reassuring as she looked around the room. "Afraid? No, my child. I've lived my life to the fullest. Now I feel an extraordinary sense of peace, as if your father is waiting for me somewhere close, ready to guide me on this new journey." Her children couldn't hold back their tears. One of her daughters reached out, clasping her hand tightly, and whispered, "Mother, we'll miss you so much." Mrs. Lan held each of their hands in turn, her eyes filled with love and tenderness. "I know, my children, but promise me this. Live your lives with happiness. Don't let sorrow weigh you down. Always remember that your father and I will be watching over you." From a place of great peace, the small room fell into a profound stillness, broken only by the soft rustle of wind outside the window. Mrs. Lan's words were not just a farewell, but a testament of love and encouragement for the children she had devoted her entire life to. In the dim light, the image of Mrs. Lan, surrounded by her family, became a sacred moment, a memory that would stay with them forever. That night, the air in Mrs. Lan's room was filled with a profound stillness. Her family sat around her bed, their eyes full of worry and love. Mrs. Lan lay there peacefully, her breath shallow but calm, showing no signs of pain. Time seemed to stand still, allowing everyone to cherish the final moments with her. Suddenly, a gentle breeze swept through the room. It was strange because all the windows had been tightly shut to keep out the night's chill. The breeze seemed to carry more than just air. It brought a sense of tenderness, as if it came from a distant place unseen by the living. At that moment, Mrs. Lan slightly opened her eyes. A serene smile appeared on her face, soft and tranquil. Her gaze seemed to focus on something far away, something only she could see. She didn't speak a word, but quietly exhaled her final breath. Her family, holding her hands, could feel her slipping away from this world. The silence in the room was profound, yet it was not filled with fear or overwhelming sorrow. Instead, a sense of peace enveloped everyone, as if she had found what she had been waiting for: to reunite with Mr. Hai, her husband, who had been waiting for her all these years. After Mrs. Lan passed, her children began to sort through her belongings to prepare for her farewell ceremony. While tidying up, they found an old photograph of Mr. Hai, carefully kept in a small wooden box that Mrs. Lan had treasured. It was a photo of him on their wedding day, smiling brightly with eyes full of love. What struck them the most was a message, written by Mrs. Lan on the back of the photo long ago. "Mr. Hai, I will join you soon." Holding the photo, the children felt a wave of emotions, grief mixed with profound understanding. They realized that throughout her life, Mrs. Lon had never stopped loving or missing Mr. High, and now she had finally fulfilled her promise to be reunited with him in a place where love endures forever. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If you enjoy stories about love, life, and the wonders of the world, please follow our channel. This is where we share profound, inspiring stories that bring meaningful moments to your day. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your own story with us. Every subscription and support from you motivates us to continue this journey. We sincerely thank you and look forward to seeing you in our next. One morning, Grandma called the family together. Her voice, usually soft and measured, carried a hint of urgency, yet it was calm. Everyone gathered in the cozy living room, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating her kind, weathered face. She sat in her favorite chair, hands clasped on her lap. As if she was holding on to a secret she was ready to share. "I had a dream last night," she began, her voice steady but with a quiet depth that made everyone lean in closer. "I saw myself walking through a field of flowers. It was so vivid, so real. The flowers stretched as far as the eye could see. Every color imaginable, bright yellows, deep purples, soft whites. The sunlight danced across the petals and the breeze carried their sweet scent. It felt like the most beautiful place I'd ever been." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, her gaze distant as if she were still there, walking among the flowers. She paused, letting her words sink in, and then continued. "But it wasn't just the beauty of the place. It was the feeling. I can't quite describe it. Peace, calm, like I was exactly where I was meant to be." The room fell silent as the family absorbed her words. Her granddaughter, sitting on the floor near her feet, looked up and asked softly, "Were you happy, Grandma?" Grandma's face broke into a gentle smile. "Oh, I was more than happy. I was at peace. It felt as though all my worries, all my pain had melted away. It was as if I had been given a glimpse of something truly wonderful." The family exchanged glances, sensing that this dream carried a deeper meaning. Grandma leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. "I don't know what it means," she admitted, her voice quieter now, "but I think it's a sign. Maybe it's a reminder that there's something beautiful waiting for us, something we don't need to fear." Her words lingered in the air, filling the room with both wonder and reflection. Though none of them said it out loud, they all felt it, a sense of reverence for the mystery of life, and perhaps what comes after. In her dream, she found herself walking through a vast field of flowers. The colors were vivid and radiant, with every shade imaginable, yellows, purples, reds, and whites blending harmoniously. Each flower seemed to glow softly in the sunlight, their delicate petals swaying gently in the breeze. Above her, the sky stretched wide and clear, a flawless blue that seemed to go on forever. The sunlight wasn't harsh or overwhelming. Instead, it bathed everything in a warm, golden light that made the entire scene feel almost ethereal. It was as though time itself had slowed, allowing her to savor every moment, every detail of the beauty around her. With each step she took, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The ground beneath her feet was soft, the path ahead inviting and endless. She could hear the gentle rustling of the flowers and the distant melody of birdsong, a natural harmony that filled her heart with tranquility. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she wanted to absorb the serenity of this place fully. Each step seemed to carry her further away from worries, pain, or fear. The air was crisp and pure, carrying a faint, sweet fragrance from the flowers that surrounded her. It wasn't just the physical beauty of the field that struck her. It was the feeling, the unshakable sense of calm and contentment that wrapped around her like a soft embrace. It was a peace unlike anything she had ever known, as though this place wasn't just a dream, but a glimpse of something greater, something beyond the ordinary world. As she walked, she didn't feel rushed or anxious. Instead, she felt perfectly in tune with the world around her, as though she belonged to this field, to this moment. There was no need for words, no need for questions. Everything felt exactly as it should be, perfect, peaceful, and eternal. As the family gathered around her in the cozy living room, Grandma looked at each of them with a soft smile. She took a deep breath, her voice calm and steady as she spoke. "I think I might be going to a very beautiful place," she said. Her words lingered in the air, carried by the warm glow of the fireplace. The family sitting close together exchanged quiet glances. They listened intently, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and quiet reassurance. No one spoke immediately, not wanting to interrupt the gentle, almost sacred moment. The youngest of the family, a little girl sitting by Grandma's feet, looked up and asked, "What do you mean, Grandma? A beautiful place?" Grandma chuckled softly, her eyes reflecting a sense of peace. "It's hard to explain," she said, "but I feel it in my heart. It's not something to fear, it's something I've come to accept. In my dream there was so much light, so much beauty, it felt like a place I was meant to go." Her voice was steady, almost serene, as if she were describing a journey she had long prepared for. The family members leaned in closer, some placing their hands gently on her arm or shoulder. The warmth of their presence filled the room, yet there was an unspoken hesitation. They didn't fully understand her words, but felt the weight of them nonetheless. No one wanted to think of this as a farewell. Grandma didn't seem sad or worried. Instead, there was a quiet confidence in her tone, as though she had seen something far beyond what any of them could imagine. Her eldest son, sitting across from her, finally spoke. "Mom, you're not going anywhere yet. You're still here with us?" His words were firm but carried an undertone of hope. Hope that this moment wasn't what it seemed. Grandma simply smiled at him, her eyes filled with love. "I know, dear. And I'm happy to be here with you all now. But if the time comes, don't be afraid. It's not goodbye, it's just the next part of the journey." The family fell into a quiet reflection, absorbing her words. No one truly wanted to say it out loud, but deep down, they felt it. This might be her way of gently preparing them for something they couldn't yet face. The atmosphere in the room shifted, not with fear but with a profound sense of connection. Grandma's words, spoken so simply, carried a deep wisdom that stayed with them, lingering long after the conversation had ended. Exactly 1 week after sharing her dream, Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep. It was early in the morning when the family discovered her, lying on her bed with a calm expression, as though she were still immersed in the serenity of the dream she had described. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains. Her face held a faint smile, a reflection of the peace she had spoken about just days earlier. It was as if she had stepped into the very field of flowers she had seen in her dream, walking toward the beautiful place she had described. The family gathered around her, their grief tempered by the profound sense of calm that filled the room. There was no struggle, no pain, only the quiet dignity of a life gently transitioning. Her presence lingered in the air, not as a void, but as a gentle reminder of the love and wisdom she had shared with them. "She looked so peaceful," one family member whispered, breaking the silence. Another nodded, wiping away quiet tears. "It's like she was ready," they said. "She told us not to be afraid, and now—" I think she wasn't afraid either. As they sat together, memories of her dream came flooding back. The field of flowers, the sense of light and tranquility, and her words about going to a beautiful place, all seemed to carry a new weight. It was no longer just a dream but a message, a way of preparing them for this moment, of letting them know that she had found peace. The youngest grandchild, too young to fully grasp the gravity of the moment, spoke up with innocent curiosity. "Do you think she's in her field of flowers now?" The question, simple yet profound, brought a small, bittersweet smile to everyone's faces. "Yes," someone replied softly. "I think she is." In the days that followed, the family found themselves reflecting on her dream more and more. It became a source of comfort, a reminder that love and connection persist beyond the boundaries of life and death. Her departure, though painful, felt like part of a larger, beautiful story, a story she had gently shared with them in her final days. And so, while the house felt quieter without her presence, it wasn't filled with despair. Instead, it was filled with a quiet reverence for the life she had lived and the peace she had embraced in the end. Her dream had not only prepared her for her journey but had also left the family with a lasting sense of hope and serenity. Spiritual experts have long believed that before someone passes away, their soul often sends signals to prepare for the transition to another realm. This journey is not merely the end of a life, but a passage to a place of peace and serenity. During this process, the soul seems to reach out to loved ones left behind, offering comfort, reassurance, and emotional readiness for the inevitable separation. Dreams are often seen as an important channel for this connection between the soul and the living world. In these dreams, the person nearing the end of their life might see calming and symbolic images, such as a vibrant field of flowers, a path leading to light, or a reunion with loved ones who have already passed on. These visions not only carry deep symbolic meaning, but also reflect the sense of peace that the soul is experiencing. For family members, such dreams can serve as a way of understanding that the person is ready. It is a gentle message that they need not worry or grieve excessively, as the soul has prepared itself and embraced the journey with serenity. These dreams also bring hope and comfort, helping loved ones see the transition, not just as a loss but as a passage to something better. Spiritual experts believe this is no coincidence. Every step of the preparation serves a purpose, and the soul's communication through dreams is a way of creating connection, reminding us that love and bonds never truly fade, even when two worlds seem separate. In the stillness of such moments, these dreams become a final gift carrying peace and love. They allow the departing soul to leave the earthly realm gracefully and help those left behind to continue living with a sense of acceptance and tranquility. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch our story. If it resonated with you or brought you comfort, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment like this or have a story of your own to share? Your voice matters, and we'd be honored to read your insights. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to help us continue creating meaningful content that connects us all. Your support inspires us to share more heartfelt stories and reflections. Thank you, and we hope to see you again. That night, in the familiar comfort of his home, an elderly man passed away suddenly. It was a quiet departure, with no prior warning or sign of distress. The stillness in the air seemed heavier than usual, as if the house itself was holding its breath. His family, unaware of what had just happened, continued with their routines, blissfully unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. As the hours passed, the realization began to sink in. His absence was felt in the quiet echoes of the house. The chair he often sat in seemed emptier. The ticking of the old clock in the living room grew louder, filling the void left behind. Yet no one could anticipate what would happen next, a phenomenon so strange it would leave everyone in the family in awe. When morning came, the family gathered in the living room, trying to process the events of the night before. It was then that someone noticed the antique clock on the mantel. Its hands, which had always moved steadily for as long as they could remember, were now frozen. The time displayed on the clock matched the exact moment the elderly man had passed away. The family was stunned. The clock, an heirloom that had been in the house for generations, had never stopped working. For years it had been a reliable timekeeper, marking the passage of life in the household. Now it stood as though it had paused, bearing witness to the moment when one life ended. The family couldn't help but feel that this was no coincidence. Some said the clock had seen the man's soul depart, as if it had marked the exact moment of his transition. Others were simply struck by the profound silence of the house, as if it too was mourning. This moment became a profound memory for the family, a symbol of how time, love, and loss are intertwined. It was as though the stillness of the clock mirrored the stillness of their hearts, pausing in a moment of deep reflection and connection. In the quiet living room, the antique clock stood proudly on the mantel, a symbol of reliability and tradition. For decades, its rhythmic ticking had been a comforting background sound in the household, marking the passing of hours and days without fail. It had witnessed family gatherings, moments of joy, and times of sorrow, always moving forward, never faltering. But now something was different. The steady ticking was gone. The silence that replaced it was almost deafening, as if the clock itself had joined the house in mourning. A family member, noticing the absence of sound, approached the clock. Its hands were frozen, pointing to a specific time. Confused, they checked their own watch, and a shiver ran down their spine. The time on the clock matched exactly the moment the elderly man had taken his last breath. The realization spread through the family, bringing with it a mix of emotions, grief, awe, and a profound sense of mystery. The clock, which had faithfully marked the passage of time for so long, had now stopped, as though it too recognized the significance of the moment. It was as if the clock had paused in reverence, acknowledging the transition of a life it had silently accompanied for years. Some in the family believed it was merely a coincidence, a mechanical failure that happened to align with the man's passing. But others couldn't dismiss the significance of the timing. How could it be that the clock, an object so tied to the rhythm of their lives, had chosen this exact moment to stop? For them, it was more than a coincidence. It was a sign, a symbolic marker of the man's departure from the physical world. The room felt heavier now, filled with an air of solemnity. The stopped clock stood as a silent witness, a reminder of the fragility of time and the mysteries that surround life and death. Its frozen hand seemed to say that, for one moment, time itself had paused to honor the man's passing. As the family sat together, they reflected on the strange event. The clock, once just an object, had become something more. It was a connection between the physical and the spiritual, a bridge between worlds. Whether it was a coincidence or something beyond their understanding, the stopped clock became a cherished symbol of that night, a moment where time, love, and mystery intertwined. As the family gathered in the living room the next morning, their grief was heavy. The air was still, and the house seemed quieter than usual. One family member, drawn by an uneasy feeling, turned their attention to the antique clock on the mantel. The clock, a familiar fixture in the household, had always ticked steadily, its rhythmic sound blending into the background of their daily lives. But now the clock was silent. Its hands were frozen at a specific time. A curious glance soon turned into shock when they realized that the time displayed on the clock matched exactly the moment the elderly man had passed away. The family exchanged bewildered looks, their sadness momentarily replaced by awe and confusion. Could this be a coincidence? They wondered aloud. The clock had been in perfect working order the day before, faithfully marking the hours and minutes without fail, but now its stillness seemed deliberate, almost purposeful, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to stop. Some members of the family believed it was just a mechanical failure, an uncanny alignment of timing, but others couldn't ignore the significance. To them it felt like a sign, a silent witness to the man's final moments. It was as though the clock, a quiet observer of their lives for so many years, had paused in reverence, marking the precise moment his soul left this world. The room grew heavier with the weight of their thoughts. The stopped clock became more than just a broken timepiece. It was a symbol, a connection between the physical and the spiritual. Its frozen hand seemed to carry a message, an acknowledgement of the transition from life to the unknown. As they stood around the clock, the family couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. It was as if the clock, in its stillness, had captured a sacred moment, one that went beyond the boundaries of time and space. The once ordinary object now held a deeper meaning, reminding them of the mysteries that surround life and death. For days, the stopped clock became a topic of reflection. The family would glance at it with a mixture of sadness and reverence, feeling that it had shared in their loss. Whether by coincidence or something greater, the clock had etched itself into their memories, a silent companion to the most profound moment of their lives. There are those who believe that the stopping of the clock was not just a random mechanical failure. To them it was something far deeper, an extraordinary reaction to the spiritual energy released at the moment of the man's passing. They see the clock as more than a timekeeping device. It became a silent witness to the profound transition of a soul leaving this world. In the realm of spirituality, it's often said that the energy of a person doesn't simply disappear when they pass away. Instead, it lingers, subtly influencing the physical world around them. Objects that are meaningful, or those that have been a constant presence in someone's life, are thought to resonate with this energy. An antique clock, steeped in history and intertwined with a family's daily existence, becomes more than an object. It becomes a keeper of time, memory, and emotion. When the clock stopped at the exact moment of the man's death, it seemed to mark a shift, as though time itself had paused to acknowledge the moment. For those who believe in the power of spiritual energy, the stopped clock wasn't a coincidence, but a symbolic gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of the soul's departure. The idea is that objects, especially those with emotional significance, can respond to the energy of the people around them. In this case, the clock stopping at such a precise moment was seen as an alignment between the physical and the spiritual. It was as if the clock, which had always been a part of the man's life, joined in the final farewell, its hands freezing to mark the transition from one realm to another. Skeptics might dismiss this as superstition or chance, but for those who experienced it, the timing was too perfect, too meaningful to ignore. The stopped clock became a symbol of connection, a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. It reminded the family that even in the midst of loss, there are moments that transcend explanation, moments where the invisible forces of life and death make themselves known. For the family, the clock now carried a deeper significance. It wasn't just a timepiece anymore. It was a reminder of the mysterious bond between the living and the departed. Whether as a spiritual marker or a meaningful coincidence, the stopped clock became a lasting part of their story, a reflection of the unseen energy that connects us all. Some spiritualists believe that when a person passes away, the energy of their soul doesn't simply vanish. Instead, it lingers, radiating out and influencing the physical world around them. According to this belief, certain objects, particularly those that hold emotional or historical significance, are sensitive to this energy and may react to it. Events like a clock stopping at the exact moment of death are often seen as more than coincidence. They are considered signs of the soul's transition from one world to the next. The idea is rooted in the concept that everything in the universe is connected by unseen forces. When a soul departs, it creates an energetic shift that can leave an imprint on its surroundings. This energy, some say, can speak through objects in subtle yet profound ways. A stopped clock, for instance, might serve as a marker of the precise moment a life ends, symbolizing the passage from the physical to the spiritual realm. The stopped clock is more than just an anomaly. It's seen as a moment of connection between two worlds. For those who believe, the clock's frozen hands serve as a reminder that time, as we know it, is no longer relevant to the departed soul. Instead, it signifies the beginning of a new journey, one that transcends earthly constraints. For families who experience such phenomena, the event can bring comfort amidst grief. The stopped clock becomes a silent witness, acknowledging the significance of the moment. It's as though the object itself has paused in reverence, reflecting the stillness and transition occurring in that instant. Skeptics may dismiss this as nothing more than chance or a mechanical failure, but for those who believe, the timing is too precise, the symbolism too meaningful to ignore. These moments become a powerful reminder of the mysteries that surround life and death, offering a glimpse into the unseen connections that link us all. The stopped clock is not just a tool for measuring time, it becomes a symbol of love, memory, and the ongoing presence of the departed. It serves as a bridge between the living and the spiritual, reminding us that even in loss there is connection. To those who believe, these moments are not coincidences. They are profound messages that transcend explanation, offering comfort and a sense of the divine in life's most difficult moments. We sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch this story. If it touched your emotions or made you reflect, please share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We truly appreciate your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. That night, in a quiet and nearly deserted hospital, Mrs. Mai lay still on her bed. The small patient room was dimly lit, with shadows softly dancing on the walls. The only sounds breaking the silence were the gentle beeping of medical equipment, a rhythmic reminder of life's fragility. The room felt both peaceful and melancholic. The faint hum of machines filled the space, creating an atmosphere of solitude. Outside, the night stretched on endlessly, with the occasional gust of wind brushing against the window. Mrs. Mai's family had gone home for the night, leaving her to rest. They had been there all day, their faces etched with worry and love. But now the room was empty except for her. It was a moment of profound stillness, where the weight of time seemed to hang in the air. She lay quietly, her frail hands resting on the blanket. Her breathing was shallow but steady, each breath a delicate thread connecting her to the present. She gazed softly at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting like the faint breeze outside. The loneliness of the room didn't seem to bother her. Instead, there was a strange calmness in the stillness, as if she had accepted this quiet moment as part of her journey. The faint glow from the small bedside lamp cast a warm light, giving the room an almost ethereal quality. It was a night like no other, a night filled with the quiet hum of life, the stillness of time, and the unspoken understanding that this moment was hers alone to hold. Suddenly something unusual happened. In the quiet hospital room, a delicate white butterfly appeared, its fragile wings shimmering faintly in the dim light. It fluttered softly, gracefully circling the room. The oddity of the moment wasn't lost. It was impossible to ignore. The windows were tightly shut, the doors securely closed. There was no way the butterfly could have entered. Yet there it was, moving slowly, almost deliberately, as if it were searching for something or someone. The stillness of the room seemed to amplify its presence. The gentle hum of the medical equipment faded into the background, replaced by the faint whisper of the butterfly's wings as it danced through the air. Its movements were calm, deliberate, and strangely comforting, like a silent message floating on unseen currents. For a moment, the room felt different, no longer just a clinical space filled with machines and sterile walls, but a space imbued with a quiet, otherworldly energy. The butterfly continued to glide, its small shadow flickering on the walls, cast by the bedside lamp. Its flight pattern seemed almost intentional, as if it carried a purpose unknown to anyone else. It hovered near the bed, then drifted toward the window before returning to the center of the room. There was something poetic, even serene, in its movements, like a symbol of life, delicate and fleeting, yet filled with meaning. The presence of the butterfly didn't feel intrusive or unsettling. Instead, it brought a strange sense of peace, as if it belonged there, as if it had come to fulfill some quiet role in this sacred moment. The butterfly fluttered gracefully around the room, its movement slow and deliberate, as if guided by an invisible force. Finally, it descended gently, landing on Mrs. Mai's frail hand. Its delicate wings quivered slightly, reflecting the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Mrs. Mai, who had been lying still, suddenly stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed disoriented. Then her gaze fell on the butterfly resting on her hand. Her expression softened, and something profound flickered in her eyes, an emotion that was hard to describe. It wasn't surprise or fear, but rather recognition, as if she had been expecting this fragile visitor all along. She studied the butterfly intently, her fingers remaining motionless, careful not to disturb its gentle presence. There was a strange familiarity in the way she looked at it, as though it carried a memory or a message only she could understand. A quiet smile spread across her lips, faint but filled with warmth. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The cold sterility of the hospital room seemed to fade, replaced by an almost tangible sense of warmth and peace. The hum of the medical equipment in the background seemed to recede, leaving a serene silence in its wake. Mrs. Mai's breathing grew calmer, her chest rising and falling gently. Her gaze remained fixed on the butterfly, her smile lingering as if it brought her a sense of comfort and understanding. To her, this tiny creature wasn't just a butterfly. It was something more, something symbolic, as if it carried with it the presence of a loved one or a whisper from a distant place. The butterfly stayed there for what felt like an eternity, unmoving, as if it too understood the significance of the moment. It was a connection, quiet yet profound, between the frail woman and the ethereal visitor. The warmth in the room didn't come from the lamp or the thin blanket covering Mrs. Mai. It came from the unspoken bond shared between her and the butterfly. In those few moments, the hospital room became a sanctuary of quiet beauty, a place where life's fragility met its deeper meaning. The next morning, Mrs. Mai's family returned to the hospital. The early sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. As they entered, they immediately noticed the stillness. The butterfly, which had so mysteriously appeared the night before, was gone. Yet the room didn't feel empty. It was as though its presence had left behind something intangible but deeply felt. The family members exchanged quiet glances, sensing an unusual tranquility in the air. It wasn't just the natural calm of the morning or the lack of activity in the hospital. It was something else entirely, an overwhelming sense of peace that enveloped the small space. The bed, neatly arranged, seemed to radiate warmth despite its emptiness. On the bedside table, a small framed photo of Mrs. Mai and her loved ones stood as a gentle reminder of the bonds they shared. Beside it, a vase with fresh flowers added a touch of life to the otherwise quiet room. Each member of the family took a moment to absorb the scene. There was no sign of the butterfly that had so captivated their attention, but its absence only heightened the mysterious calm that lingered. It was as if the butterfly had been a messenger, a silent yet powerful presence that delivered one final farewell from someone they loved dearly. One of the children approached the bed, lightly running their hand over the blanket as if seeking comfort. Another stood by the window, looking out at the soft morning light and the swaying branches of the trees outside. Though no words were spoken, their shared understanding was palpable. The room, which had been a place of worry and sorrow for so long, now felt transformed. It held a sense of closure, of acceptance, as though it was offering them the comfort they needed to move forward. As the family quietly gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, each carried with them the unspoken understanding that they had witnessed something profound. The butterfly, though fleeting, had left an enduring impression, a message of peace and a reminder that love transcends even the boundaries of life and death. It was a farewell without words, a quiet assurance that Mrs. Mai had found her peace, and in doing so, had gifted her family with a sense of serenity that would remain with them long after they left that small hospital room. The family sat together in the quiet hospital room, the morning light streaming gently through the window. Although the butterfly that had so mysteriously appeared the night before was now gone, its presence lingered in their thoughts. It wasn't just a fleeting visit. It felt like something far more meaningful. One of the children spoke softly, breaking the reflective silence. "Do you think it was more than just a butterfly?" they asked, their voice filled with wonder. Another nodded slowly, their gaze fixed on the empty windowsill. "It's strange, isn't it? How it appeared just as she took her final breath. It stayed with her, as if it was waiting for the right moment." The family couldn't help but believe that the butterfly carried the spirit of someone they had all loved, someone who had come to guide Mrs. Mai on her final journey. Perhaps it was her late husband, a sibling or a friend long departed. Whoever it was, the butterfly seemed to carry a message. She was not alone in her passage to the next world. As they shared their thoughts, the family felt a deep sense of connection to the moment. It wasn't just about the butterfly's mysterious visit. It was about what it symbolized. The delicate wings, moving gracefully through the air, represented something eternal, an invisible bond between the living and the departed. "It's almost like she was telling us goodbye," another family member murmured, their voice filled with emotion. The butterfly was her way of saying she's at peace now, and we should be too. The image of the butterfly flying away stayed with them. It wasn't just a part of that night. It became a symbol etched in their memories. Every detail, the way its wings glowed in the soft light, the quiet flutter of its movements, seemed to carry a message of love, reassurance, and continuity. They thought about